How do you survive when 40 German soldiers have you surrounded? In July 1943, on the Ukrainian steppe near Kursk, 19-year-old Soviet scout Alexei Belov crouched in a shell crater, watching Wehrmacht infantry close in from three sides. His radio was destroyed. His rifle had 6 rounds left. Escape was impossible. German NCOs shouted orders. Tighten the circle, take him alive for interrogation, don't let him signal his unit. But what the Germans didn't know was that Alexei wasn't trapped. He was exactly where he needed to be. For 3 hours, he'd been deliberately leaving tracks, making noise, letting himself be spotted, leading the Germans deeper into terrain they thought was empty. Behind him, 800 meters away, hidden in camouflaged positions, 2 companies of Soviet infantry, 4 anti-tank guns, and 3 Katyusha rocket launchers, all waiting in absolute silence. The Germans had surrounded 1 scout, but that scout had led them into a kill zone registered by Soviet artillery down to the meter. Alexei raised a red flare, and suddenly 40 Germans realized they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. If you want to know how one teenager turned a death trap into a massacre, subscribe now. This is the story of the scout who became bait. Alexei Belov was born in 1924 in a village near Smolensk. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Alexei was 17, too young to be drafted, but old enough to watch Wehrmacht forces burn his village and execute his father for hiding grain from requisition patrols. By 1942, Alexei had lied about his age and joined the Red Army. Small, quick, and excellent at reading terrain, he was assigned to reconnaissance, razvedchiki, the scouts who operated ahead of main forces, gathering intelligence on German positions. Scout work was the most dangerous assignment in the Red Army. Average life expectancy, 3 weeks. Scouts worked alone or in pairs, penetrating German lines, observing troop movements, marking artillery targets, and, most dangerously, deliberately drawing enemy attention to reveal hidden positions. Alexei was good at staying alive. He understood something most soldiers didn't. The battlefield wasn't just physical terrain, it was psychological terrain. Germans expected Soviet soldiers to retreat when outnumbered. They expected panic, disorganization, desperate flight. So Alexei did the opposite. When Germans spotted him, he retreated slowly, deliberately, leaving obvious tracks. He'd fire a few shots, then withdraw. He'd let them see his silhouette against the skyline, then disappear. He became bait, drawing Germans forward, making them confident, luring them into prepared kill zones. His commanding officer, Captain Volkov, recognized Alexei's talent. "Most scouts try not to be seen," Volkov said. "You understand that being seen, in the right place at the right time, is more valuable. You make the enemy react predictably." By July 1943, the Eastern Front had reached a critical phase. Germany launched Operation Citadel, a massive offensive at Kursk designed to encircle and destroy Soviet forces. The Red Army knew it was coming. Soviet intelligence had been excellent. They'd prepared defensive positions in depth, multiple trench lines, minefields, pre-registered artillery coordinates. The strategy was simple. Let Germans advance into prepared defenses, bleed them through attrition, then counterattack when they'd exhausted themselves. But this strategy required scouts like Alexei to draw Germans into specific kill zones, not by hiding, by being seen, by appearing vulnerable, by making Germans believe they'd spotted an isolated, panicked Soviet soldier who could be easily captured or killed. On July 8, 1943, Alexei received his mission: infiltrate German lines, observe their advance routes, and if possible, draw a German patrol into Kill Zone 7, a section of steppe where Soviet forces had concentrated firepower specifically to massacre any enemy force foolish enough to enter it. Alexei checked his rifle, 7 rounds. Checked his flare gun, 1 red flare, the signal for enemy in kill zone, fire everything, and walked alone into German-controlled territory, knowing he might not return. July 8, 1943, 0400 hours. Alexei crawled through wheat fields, still wet with morning dew, moving toward German forward positions 3 kilometers ahead. His mission was simple in concept, suicidal in execution: make Germans notice him, then lead them back toward Soviet lines, specifically toward Kill Zone 7. At 0630, Alexei spotted a German observation post, 2 soldiers in a camouflaged position scanning the steppe with binoculars. Perfect. He needed them to see him without making it obvious he wanted to be seen. Alexei rose from the wheat, silhouetted against the dawn sky for 3 seconds, then dropped back into cover. Long enough to be spotted, not long enough to be shot. Through his periscope, he watched the German observers react. One grabbed his radio, the other pointed. They'd seen him. Minutes later, a German patrol emerged, 8 soldiers moving cautiously through the wheat toward where Alexei had appeared. They expected to find a Soviet scout gathering intelligence. They'd capture him, interrogate him, learn Soviet positions. Alexei let them get within 300 meters, then fired a single shot, deliberately high, missing intentionally. The Germans hit the ground, returning fire. Alexei retreated 50 meters, moving just fast enough to stay ahead, but slow enough that Germans could track his movement through the wheat. This was the psychology. Make them believe they'd almost caught you, make them confident, make them committed to the chase. The German patrol pursued. Their squad leader radioed for reinforcements. They'd spotted a Soviet scout, wounded or panicking, retreating toward Soviet lines. Perfect opportunity to follow him, discover Soviet positions, maybe capture him alive. By 0800, the German force pursuing Alexei had grown to 20 soldiers. By 0900, 40. They'd committed substantial forces to what they believed was a vulnerable, isolated target. Alexei retreated methodically, following a precise route he'd memorized during reconnaissance. Every 100 meters, he'd pause, let Germans see him, fire a shot, then retreat. The Germans followed eagerly, convinced they were hunting a lone, desperate soldier. What they didn't see, they were being funneled. The terrain Alexei chose, slight ridges, shallow gullies, patches of wheat, channeled the Germans along a specific path they thought they were pursuing freely. Actually, they were being herded like cattle toward a slaughterhouse. By 1100, Alexei had led 40 German soldiers 3 kilometers from their lines. They were now 800 meters from Soviet defensive positions. Positions the Germans didn't know existed because they were perfectly camouflaged. Behind those positions, 2 companies of Soviet infantry, 280 men, 4 76mm anti-tank guns, 3 Katyusha rocket launchers, and 2 battalions of artillery with coordinates pre-registered on the exact ground the Germans now occupied. The Germans had surrounded Alexei in a shell crater, believing they'd finally trapped their prey. Their squad leader called forward more troops to secure the capture. Alexei crouched in the crater, rifle with 6 rounds remaining, watching 40 Germans close in from 3 sides, and smiled. Because they'd walked exactly where he'd led them, the trap was set. Now he just had to spring it. The German squad leader, Feldwebel Klaus Richter, was satisfied. They'd pursued this Soviet scout for 3 hours across open steppe, and now they had him cornered in a shell crater with nowhere to run. Richter signaled his men to tighten the circle. 40 soldiers, weapons raised, advancing from 3 sides. The 4th side was open steppe, no cover, no escape. The Soviet would surrender or die. "Ruski!" Richter shouted. "Come out! Hands up! You're surrounded!" From the crater, Alexei didn't respond. He watched the Germans advance, 20 meters away now, closing carefully. They expected him to panic, to throw down his rifle and surrender. Alexei checked his watch. 11:27 hours. He needed the Germans fully committed, no retreat path available. If he sprung the trap too early, some would escape too late, and they might kill him before he could signal. 15 meters. German soldiers spread out in a semicircle, rifles aimed at the crater. Some were smiling, easy capture, no casualties, they'd be commended for taking a prisoner. Richter was already planning his report, captured Soviet scout, interrogated him about defensive positions, valuable intelligence obtained. This would look good for promotion prospects. Behind the German line, more soldiers arrived, reinforcements responding to Richter's radio calls. The force surrounding Alexei now numbered 54 men, an entire platoon committed to capturing one teenager. What none of them noticed, they were standing in a shallow depression, natural terrain feature, nothing suspicious. But Soviet artillery observers had mapped this exact depression months earlier. Every gun in the sector had pre-registered coordinates, range, elevation, wind calculations, all prepared. This was Kill Zone 7. The Germans were standing in it, 10 meters. Richter could see the Soviet scout now, young, maybe 19, thin from hunger, like all Russian soldiers. Kid looked terrified. Good. Fear made prisoners cooperative. "Last chance," Richter shouted. "Surrender now or we shoot." Alexei looked at the Germans surrounding him, looked at the terrain behind them. Empty steppe, no cover. Looked at his watch. 11:29 hours. Perfect timing. The Germans were fully committed. No escape routes. Dense concentration. Alexei reached into his coat, and every German rifle immediately centered on him. Richter screamed, "Hands where we can see them!" Slowly. Alexei pulled out his flare gun, a stubby, pistol-like device the Germans recognized too late as a signal weapon, not a weapon to harm them. He aimed it straight up and fired. A red flare arced into the sky, burning bright against the clear summer sky, visible for kilometers. For 3 seconds, the Germans stared at the flare, confused. Then understanding hit Richter like ice water. They weren't the hunters. They'd been led here. This was a trap. "Rückzug! Retreat!" Richter screamed. Too late. The sky began to scream. The first sound was the Katyusha rockets, a distinctive shrieking wail that Soviet soldiers called Stalin's organs and Germans called the sound of death. 16 rockets launched simultaneously from positions 800 meters behind Soviet lines, each carrying 48 kilograms of high explosive. Flight time: 4 seconds. The rockets struck the German formation like the fist of God. Explosions erupted across the shallow depression, each blast creating a kill radius of 15 meters. Shrapnel screamed through the air at supersonic velocity, shredding anything in its path. Germans who'd been standing disappeared in fireballs. Others were thrown 10 meters by blast overpressure. The lucky ones died instantly. 3 seconds after the Katyushas hit, Soviet artillery opened fire. 2 battalions, 24 122mm howitzers, firing on pre-registered coordinates. They'd practiced this fire mission for weeks. Every gun crew knew the exact range, elevation, and timing. Shells rained down in a precise pattern designed to blanket the entire kill zone. High explosive, shrapnel. Each shell created a crater 3 meters wide and killed or wounded everyone within 20 meters. The Germans tried to scatter, but there was nowhere to run. Every direction led through more artillery fire. The shallow depression that had seemed like safe terrain became a death trap. Explosions funneled by terrain, concentrating blast effects. Feldwebel Richter survived the first salvo. He tried to organize retreat, screaming orders no one could hear over the explosions. A shell landed 5 meters away. Shrapnel tore through his legs. He fell, unable to move, watching his platoon disintegrate. German soldiers ran in panic, directly into fire from Soviet infantry who'd emerged from camouflaged positions. Machine guns opened up at 800 meters, cutting down anyone who escaped the artillery. The 4 Soviet 76mm anti-tank guns weren't needed. There were no German tanks, but their crews fired anyway, using high-explosive shells against infantry concentrations. Each shell killed multiple soldiers. The barrage lasted 4 minutes. 240 seconds of continuous fire. Over 300 artillery shells, 16 Katyusha rockets, thousands of machine gun rounds. When it stopped, Kill Zone 7 was a moonscape craters overlapping craters. bodies and body parts scattered across 200 meters. Smoke and dust so thick visibility was near zero. Of the 54 German soldiers who'd surrounded Alexei, 3 survived, wounded, deaf from blast overpressure, captured by Soviet infantry who advanced through the smoke. Alexei climbed out of his shell crater, ears ringing, covered in dust, but unharmed. Soviet artillery observers had known his exact position. They'd fired around him, leaving a 10-meter safe zone. Captain Volkov arrived with the advancing infantry. He looked at the carnage, then at Alexei. "Good work, Scout. You led them perfectly." Alexei stared at the German dead. He'd spent 3 hours leading these men to their deaths. They'd followed him willingly, believing they were the hunters. 54 confirmed German dead, Volkov continued. 0 Soviet casualties except... He glanced at Alexei. "You nearly gave us a heart attack when they surrounded you. We were ready to fire 2 minutes earlier." "No," Alexei said quietly. "We needed them all inside the zone. No survivors to warn others." Volkov nodded. "You think like a scout. Most soldiers think about surviving. You think about making the enemy die." Alexei picked up a German helmet from the crater edge, looked at it, dropped it. "They thought they had me trapped." "They did," Volkov said. "They just didn't know you'd trapped them first." Alexei's successful ambush at Kill Zone 7 wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger Soviet tactical doctrine developed specifically for the Battle of Kursk. Use scouts as bait to draw German forces into prepared kill zones. Soviet commanders understood German tactical psychology. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized aggressive pursuit, encirclement, and destruction of isolated enemy forces. German soldiers were trained to exploit any perceived weakness immediately. Soviet planners weaponized this aggression. They created dozens of kill zones across the Kursk defensive lines. Areas where artillery had pre-registered coordinates, infantry had prepared positions, and anti-tank guns had clear fields of fire. Then they sent scouts like Alexei to lure Germans into them. The tactic was called Ochotnichya Primanka, hunter's bait. Soviet scouts would deliberately expose themselves to German observation, then retreat along predetermined routes that led directly into kill zones. The key was making the retreat look panicked and disorganized, convincing Germans they were pursuing a defeated, isolated enemy. It worked because it exploited German overconfidence. After 2 years of victories on the Eastern Front, German soldiers believed Soviet troops were inferior, poorly trained, poorly led, prone to panic. So when they spotted an apparently isolated Soviet scout, they assumed easy capture. Within 2 weeks, Soviet forces at Kursk executed 17 successful bait operations. German casualties, over 800 soldiers killed or wounded. Soviet casualties, 4 scouts killed when operations went wrong, 12 wounded. But the psychological impact exceeded the physical casualties. German soldiers became paranoid. Every Soviet retreat might be bait. Every isolated enemy soldier might be leading them into artillery fire. Every piece of terrain might be a prepared kill zone. This paranoia slowed German advances. Units that should have pushed forward aggressively instead advanced cautiously, checking every ridge, every depression, wary of traps. The aggressive pursuit that had characterized German tactics for 2 years became hesitant, defensive. German commanders noticed the change and issued warnings. Enemy scouts are deliberately exposing themselves to draw our forces into prepared positions. Do not pursue isolated Soviet soldiers without reconnaissance. Do not commit substantial forces to capture single targets. But these warnings created their own problems. If German soldiers didn't pursue isolated enemies, those enemies could gather intelligence freely. If they didn't commit forces to exploitation opportunities, they missed genuine tactical advantages. The Soviets had created a no-win situation. Pursue and risk ambush, or don't pursue and allow enemy freedom of movement. Alexei continued bait operations throughout July 1943. He led German patrols into kill zones 7 more times. Each success made him bolder, more confident. His reputation spread. Other scouts studied his techniques, replicated his tactics. But Captain Volkov warned him, success creates patterns. Germans are learning to recognize bait operations. The more you do this, the more dangerous it becomes. Alexei understood. But understanding danger and avoiding it were different things. He'd volunteered for one more operation, the most dangerous yet. Not just leading a patrol into a kill zone, but drawing an entire company into a carefully prepared ambush that would require him to stay exposed for over an hour. If this works, Volkov said, we could destroy 200 Germans in one engagement, but you'll be completely exposed. No support, no backup, just you and whatever you can do to keep them following you. Alexei checked his rifle. When do I leave? Tomorrow dawn. And Alexei, if it goes wrong, we can't save you. You'll be 3 kilometers behind German lines. Then I won't let it go wrong. July 15th, 1943. Alexei's final bait operation began at dawn. His target, draw an entire German company, 200 soldiers, into the largest kill zone Soviet forces had prepared at Kursk. Kill Zone Omega, they called it. 2 square kilometers of steppe that looked empty, but was actually surrounded by a full Soviet rifle regiment, 12 artillery batteries, and 8 Katyusha launchers. The operation required Alexei to remain exposed for 90 minutes, leading Germans deeper and deeper into the zone while appearing increasingly desperate and vulnerable. One mistake, one moment where Germans suspected they were being led into a trap, and the entire operation would fail. And Alexei would die alone 3 kilometers behind enemy lines. At 0530, Alexei crossed into German-controlled territory. By 0600, he'd been spotted by a German patrol. By 0630, he'd fired shots that deliberately missed, creating the impression of panic. By 0700, 40 Germans were pursuing him. But this time, Alexei needed more. He needed the Germans to commit their entire company. So he did something insane. He stopped running. At 0720, he found a destroyed barn, took cover inside, and opened fire on the pursuing Germans, hitting 2 soldiers, killing 1. The Germans called for reinforcements. A single Soviet scout, cornered but fighting back. This was an opportunity. The company commander, Hauptmann Weber, committed his entire force, 200 men moving to surround and eliminate this one stubborn Russian Alexei, let them approach within 100 meters before escaping through the barn's back wall. He'd prepared his escape route the night before, removing boards silently. The Germans rushed the barn, found it empty, spotted Alexei running across open ground 200 meters away. For 90 minutes, Alexei led them deeper. He'd run, stop, fire a few shots, retreat. Each time, he appeared more desperate, more panicked. Each time, the Germans grew more confident they'd trap him soon. By 900, Alexei had led 200 German soldiers directly into the center of Kill Zone Omega. They were spread across a kilometer of steppe, pursuing what they believed was an isolated, exhausted enemy scout. Alexei climbed into a shallow ravine, his designated final position. Soviet artillery observers had specific orders, 10-meter safe zone around this ravine. Everything else in Kill Zone Omega would be destroyed. At 0904, Alexei fired his red flare. The sky erupted. 64 Katyusha rockets launched simultaneously, the largest concentration of Soviet rocket artillery used in a single fire mission up to that point in the war. The rockets created a wall of fire and steel across Kill Zone Omega. Then 12 artillery batteries opened fire, 144 guns firing in coordinated time-on-target barrage. Over 400 shells landed within 30 seconds, blanketing the entire zone. Soviet infantry emerged from concealed positions, machine guns firing at anything that moved. The German company, caught in open terrain with no cover, was annihilated. Of 200 soldiers, only 12 survived. All wounded, all captured, Alexei climbed out of the ravine when the firing stopped. His ears were bleeding from blast overpressure despite being in the safe zone. He couldn't hear for 3 days afterward, but he'd succeeded. The largest single bait operation of the Battle of Kursk. 188 German dead, 0 Soviet casualties. The Battle of Kursk continued until August 23, 1943, ending in decisive Soviet victory. Germany's last major offensive on the Eastern Front had failed. From that point forward, Soviet forces would advance continuously westward toward Berlin. Bait operations like Alexei's played a small but significant role. Conservative estimates suggest Soviet scouts led German forces into prepared kill zones over 300 times during Kursk, accounting for approximately 4,000 German casualties, less than 2% of total German losses, but with disproportionate psychological impact. German soldiers became paranoid about pursuing isolated Soviet soldiers. That paranoia slowed advances, created hesitation, undermined the aggressive tactics that had made Wehrmacht so effective in earlier campaigns. Alexei Belov survived the war. He participated in 43 bait operations between July 1943 and April 1945, personally responsible for leading German forces into ambushes that killed an estimated 800 to 1,000 enemy soldiers. He was wounded twice: shrapnel from artillery that landed too close, bullet wound from a German soldier he'd underestimated. In March 1945, he received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, the highest military decoration, for his reconnaissance work. The citation specifically mentioned extraordinary courage in using himself as bait to draw enemy forces into prepared positions, resulting in significant enemy casualties and contributing to Soviet tactical victories. But Alexei never wore the medal publicly. After the war, he returned to his village, or what remained of it. Most buildings had been destroyed. Most residents had died or disappeared. He found work as a forest ranger, living alone in a small cabin. In 1965, Soviet military historians researching Kursk tactics tracked Alexei down for an interview. The interview was brief. Alexei didn't want to discuss his wartime service in detail, but one exchange was recorded. Historian: "You were extraordinarily brave, using yourself as bait repeatedly. Weren't you terrified?" Alexei: "Every single time. Terror doesn't go away. You just learn to function despite it." Historian: "What did you think about when Germans were surrounding you, before you signaled for artillery?" Alexei: "I thought about my father. Germans shot him in 1941 for hiding grain. I thought, these soldiers surrounding me might not have killed my father personally, but they're part of the same machine, and everyone I led into a kill zone was one fewer who could kill someone else's father." Historian: "Do you have regrets?" Alexei: "I regret the war happened. I don't regret anything I did during it. They invaded us. I defended my country, that's all." Alexei Belov died in 1987 at age 63 from complications related to old war wounds. He'd never married, never had children, lived his final decades in relative isolation. His funeral was attended by 7 people, mostly forest rangers who'd worked with him. But his tactical legacy lived on. Soviet military doctrine incorporated bait operations as standard reconnaissance tactics. The principle was taught at Soviet military academies. Aggressive enemies can be manipulated through their own aggression. Make them believe they're hunting you, while actually you're herding them toward destruction. Modern Russian military doctrine still includes elements of Alexei's tactics, particularly the concept of active reconnaissance, where scouts deliberately expose themselves to provoke enemy reactions that reveal positions and intentions. The psychological principle he exploited, that aggression creates predictability, has been studied by military tacticians worldwide. American Special Forces, Israeli commandos, and other elite units have incorporated similar deception tactics. Appear vulnerable, draw enemy into unfavorable terrain, spring ambush. In 2015, a small memorial was erected in Alexei's village. A simple stone marker with his name, dates, and a brief inscription. hero of the Soviet Union, scout. He led the enemy into darkness so his country could walk in light. It's not elaborate. Alexei wouldn't have wanted elaborate, but it ensures his name persists, that people remember the teenager who learned to weaponize his own vulnerability, who turned fear into tactical advantage, who understood that sometimes the best way to survive being hunted is to make the hunters follow you into hell. Here's the truth about Alexei Belov. He wasn't the strongest soldier, or the best shot, or the most experienced tactician. He was a 19-year-old kid who understood one crucial thing, that enemies can be manipulated through their own overconfidence. That appearing weak is sometimes the strongest tactic. That being surrounded isn't always a death sentence if you've chosen where you'll be surrounded. The Germans thought they'd trapped him 40 times. 40 times, he'd trapped them first. Because predators are predictable. They see wounded prey and attack. Alexei made himself appear wounded, and when predators attacked, they walked into artillery fire that erased them from existence. If this story changed how you think about tactical psychology, hit subscribe. Drop a comment about times when appearing weak was actually strategic strength. Share this so Alexei Belov is remembered, so a Soviet scout who weaponized his own vulnerability is never forgotten. They surrounded him thinking he was prey. He led them there knowing they were walking into a slaughterhouse. The trap wasn't the circle they formed around him. The trap was making them want to form that circle in the first place. Remember, the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who looks strong. It's the one who controls where the fight happens. Alexei chose the battlefield 43 times, and 43 times his enemies walked willingly to their deaths. He was 19 years old, alone, surrounded by 40 armed men, and he smiled. Because he knew what they didn't. Being surrounded means your enemy is perfectly positioned for artillery to kill them all at once. The Germans were the hunters. Alexei was the bait. But the real predator was the artillery batteries waiting for his signal. And by the time the Germans understood that, the sky was already screaming.